Let me all ask you a question. When was the last time you went up to a perfect stranger on the street and told them, why is your English so lousy? Miss, you have a face for radio, not video. You must be an UMNO dog, you stupid or what? I honestly think not a lot of us have. However, it seems that a lot of us have no problem telling this to perfect strangers online, that their opinion is clearly wrong, yours is clearly right, and that they are complete morons. And by the way, these are actual comments taken from our various comment section, and these are the nicer ones. I'm sure none of us are surprised by the truth that we are nastier online. After all, that is what anonymity will do to you. But social media, once the great leveler of information, has now descended into a toxic sludge of conspiracy theories, trolling, fake news, and abuse. Hence, it is no wonder that governments around the world seem to have finally had enough and are now considering regulation. Even here, there's a proposal in the works that will allow MCMC the authority to remove content considered defamatory or have negative elements from social media. Comms Minister Gobind Singh Deo is hoping to have it tabled by July. Gobind says that while his ministry respected the freedom to discuss anything on social media, it must be done in a nice way. And with all due respect to YB, asking people on the internet to play nice has never really worked. They can barely stop themselves from spoiling Avengers Endgame if just to feel superior for 2 seconds. Regardless, I love you 3000. But it brings up some bigger questions. Should we police social media? And if the answer is yes, who should be doing it? The government or social media companies themselves? The answer to the first one, I think, is yes, because things have clearly gotten out of hand. And if you don't believe me, the live streaming of the massacre in Christchurch and the new measles epidemic should be proof enough. So some boundaries aren't a bad thing. But the trickier question is, of course, who? It is an argument that is actually all too familiar.
We need to be put in check. Whatever form that takes, I'm game. If we can't accept limitations, we're boundaryless, we're no better than the bad guys.
What if this panel sends us somewhere we don't think we should go? What if there's somewhere we need to go and they don't let us? We may not be perfect, but the safest hands are still our own.
So which are we? A Tony Stark or a Steve Rogers? The fact is, though, having governments regulate social media carte blanche is very dangerous. It has been proven time and time again that it is an extremely slippery slope where a fake news bill can quickly be turned into a tool for oppressing the masses, as we all know very well. After all, governments are run by people. People have agendas. It is all good when the government of the day is benevolent, but what happens when it isn't? Sri Lanka, for example, just banned social media to curb hate messages and false information. But it also stopped people from keeping in contact with their loved ones in times of a crisis. Most recently, Tun M said he regretted the arrest of a social media user who purportedly criticized a member of the royal family. He said people are free to criticize leaders if needed, and this is something that needs to be protected. But given who it comes from, and yes, I do note the irony, it never hurts to take it with a healthy amount of skepticism. After all, that is what he's asking for, right? And criticism, mind you, is different from slander, threats, and insults, and everyone by now should know the difference. So, governments can't be trusted completely. What about social media companies? Actually, in a way, the question's almost moot, because isn't it their sandbox you're playing in? Shouldn't it be up to them to enforce the rules? And yet, Facebook, which has become famous for its motto of move fast and break things, was surprisingly slow in addressing some glaring issues, like its role in exacerbating the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar, or, on a smaller scale, how it did nothing as anti-vaxxers targeted parents whose kids who had just died to spread their agenda. Now, to be fair to them, Facebook and Twitter have in recent months moved to ban white nationalist groups from its platform, and Tumblr did a move to ban all adult content in an effort to crack down on child porn. Two very mixed results. But it has become clear that given the sheer volume of content published every day, it is almost impossible. Hence why many are thinking a more ideal solution is to put more regulation in place for social media companies. And you know who agrees with this? Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg. In this Washington Post op-ed, Zuckerberg said that there needs to be a more active role for governments and regulators, and that by updating the rules of the internet, we can preserve what is best about it while protecting society from broader harms. He is kind of right, but he's also really passing the buck. As this New York Times article points out, there is a surge of anger towards these companies that seem more worried about their business models than their concerns. Because after all, social media companies have long bucked regulation because they've always positioned themselves as neutral gathering places rather than content creators. But the same New York Times article points out, the more speech on the platforms, the more profit they make. So in a way, it's a bit rich that Zuckerberg is asking for more regulation, essentially absolving Facebook of blame when it has already made billions and not always with clean hands. But like I said, he's not wrong. And all around the world, governments are trying to put in place regulations that would mean social media companies would be slapped with heavy fines or even jail time for their execs. In Australia, for example, a new bill could land execs in jail for 3 years for not removing abhorrent violent material. The UK government is trying to introduce new online safety laws that fine senior managers if they don't meet a duty of care, and that is just the start. Because, after all, if media companies were to publish such material without fear, they would get their licenses yanked. So, why should social media be any different? As for us in Malaysia, after all I've said, I have actually very mixed feelings about this MCMC proposal. One hand, I do agree, abusive social media posts need to be managed because human beings can't be trusted to manage ourselves. So Gobind saying that he would hold a dialogue with social media portal owners, good step. But the thing is, because the internet is forever, will removing it really get to the root of the problem? New Zealand PM Jacinda Ardern brought up a good point that while we can promote good rules locally, these platforms are global. So beyond just what we can do, we should, in an effort to try and champion some kind of international standard when it comes to social media. Maybe if we do put some boundaries in place, we can use the platforms for its original purpose for connecting us, rather than dividing us. After all, even Tony and Steve put aside their differences to face Thanos. We faced ours too. It was called G14. Just saying.